Let me read to you a passage from the 3rd chapter of St. John's Gospel, verses 16 to 21. It's the Gospel for Wednesday of the 2nd week of Eastertide. St. John writes, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, so that everyone who believes in him might not perish, but might have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world might be saved through him. Whoever believes in him will not be condemned, but whoever does not believe has already been condemned, because he has not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. And this is the verdict, that the light came into the world, but people preferred darkness to light, because their works were evil. For everyone who does wicked things hates the light, and does not come toward the light, so that his works might not be exposed. But whoever lives the truth comes to the light, so that his works may be clearly seen as done in God. That's from the 3rd chapter of St. John's Gospel, verses 16 to 21. And what does it suggest to us? Well, the greatest practical problem facing the world and every man is death, and all that leads to death. Ultimately, sickness leads to death, as can poverty, as can unhappiness in its various forms. When I say that these various forms of human deprivation lead to death, I mean that they point to death, or that if they are unchecked and not dealt with appropriately, they favour those things that lead to death. Death is the great problem of man, of the world, and of the universe. The various discoveries of science and medicine attempt to postpone death or lessen its impact, but ultimately they cannot overcome it. Furthermore, from the point of view of plain evidence, what is there to suggest that death will cease being the victor after it has put an end to this life? The spirit of man hopes that there will be an afterlife, and strongly senses that there is. The religions of man indicate that he has a premonition that there is. And we could say that conscience intimates that there will be a reckoning of one's deeds beyond death, and fears the result of it. The spirit of man could scarcely feel confident of his prospects in view of his proneness to sin and wrongdoing. What is there to ensure that death, in some sense, will not be the victor beyond the end of this life, even if there is some kind of afterlife for the soul of man? In other words, that there will not be a kind of second death and final death. Many of the religions of man have very shadowy notions and imaginings about the afterlife, and those religions that speak of the equivalent of a heaven may, from the point of view of real evidence, simply be indulging in pipe dreams. Such would be our sombre prospects, I suggest, were it not for divine revelation. Death would always be the great black hole of the universe, into which we all disappear, never to return. A black hole in which there would never be light. But in fact, all is now different. death is not and need not be the victor. In our Gospel passage today that I read, St. John writes that, and I quote, "God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, so that everyone who believes in him might not perish, but might have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world might be saved through him." Death has come through man's sin, and the Creator of all has entered our scene to reverse the situation facing us all. And at the origin of this stupendous divine initiative is love, God's love. He so loved the world that he sent his Son to save the world from death and its cause, which is sin. Christianity is not a simple religion, as Pope Paul VI many years ago wrote. But we can say that there is a certain simplicity about its essential act. The essential act of the Christian is faith. Faith in Jesus Christ. Without this faith in him, and for who he claimed to be, and for what he claimed to have done, one cannot profess to be a Christian. This act of faith is the foundation of the Christian life that follows. Now, St. John tells us in our passage today that Christ came so that everyone who believes in him might not perish, but might have eternal life. So the answer to death in the universe is to believe in Jesus Christ. Of course, it is not as simple as it might sound, because this act of faith in the person of Jesus Christ involves a full acceptance of his revelation and a life lived according to its demands and implications. Nevertheless, we have in this sentence of St. John's the answer to the problem of man and the universe, which is death. Christ is the answer to all man's needs, including death, and our response to him is faith. Let us rejoice in the fact that God has sent us a Redeemer, Jesus Christ, the Son of God made man. He is our life, and he is the answer to the presence of death. If we place our faith in him and in what he has revealed, and live according to this faith, we shall not perish, but have eternal life. Let us live that out in our everyday life and bring the message of it to others.